Every once in a while, we run into a story that is so compelling and has so many facets that we revisit it. And today, that's what we're doing with professional volleyball player Will Robbins. Many of you have emailed us and texted us and made Facebook posts about the to be continued. I told Will he ought to get a t-shirt that says to be continued ... You know, we all need one because our stories of restoration are to be continued every single day as we worship Christ 24/7 in our lives. Well, Will transitioned from a kid stealing $1,000 of cash from his dad's wallet and buying candy and playing video games for all his friends, to contemplating murder to cover up for a bank robbery that seemingly he got away with. Well, Will was sentenced to almost 8 years in prison. And today, he's going to talk about what life in prison was like. But he's going to also share with us how God used him to bring his restoration to others. As I hung on the edge of my seat watching your episodes as they were aired, I realized that we covered a lot of ground, but we glossed over 7 years of your life that had to be transformational. And those were your 7 years in prison. So I'd like you to pick it up from the sentencing. You thought it could be a lot worse, but you get the sentencing. What do you feel like, and where do you go, and what's the first night in prison like?
Well, it started off the county jail. Initially, I was brought back to Logansport, where we actually had robbed the bank, and that was actually my hometown. And so I was in the county jail for about 2 months while they were still getting the indictment, the federal indictment, and going through the grand jury process. So I was there for about 2 months until I found out that they did indict me on 4 counts. And so then I was actually picked up and escorted up to South Bend, to the county jail there, which is also a federal holding facility. Mm-hmm. And then actually my sentencing and trial and everything was there in South Bend. So then I was there about 11 months in South Bend going through my sentencing before I was actually shipped out to my first prison.
11 months?
Yeah, so total 13 months in the county jail, 2 different county jails.
And does that count as part of your time served?
Yeah, that was added to my time. So that was, it was the beginning of the incarceration. So that was March of 2002.
So the gavel comes down and the judge says, how many years?
8 years and 10 months.
What are your emotions when you hear that number of months?
For me, it was relief that it was finally all over with.
Because you surrendered your life to Christ and He had given you this vision that it was going to be okay, but there was going to be some consequences.
Yeah, I did have a certain level of peace because of the whole process, you know, with God showing me that vision and, you know, kind of reassuring the fact that I would come out on the end and have a future. From my salvation on, I mean, I was deep in the Word and attending Bible studies, getting regular weekly visits from Dr. Cosby.
Started discipling you.
Started discipling me, sending me books, sending me literature, words of encouragement. My grandmother, who's, you know, who at that time, she's passed away now, but at that time was still very active in the church and in her women's group, and was writing me probably at one time 3 times a week. She was writing to me. We had a lot of groups that were coming in from the outside, a lot of church groups that were coming in, doing different, you know, Sunday service, weekly Bible studies.
And you're probably just taking all that to heart, almost like a sponge, right? Because of your new surrender and the new life. And I remember how I wanted to devour the Bible when I recommitted my life to Christ.
As soon as I got saved, I was just, you know, was reading every book I could get my hand on, every article. I mean, we were involved in different little Bible studies and little devotionals, and I mean, really anything and everything I could get my hands on.
You know, the sentencing reminds me of a biblical picture. You got mercy, which is less than you deserve. Justice is what you deserve, getting what you deserve. Mercy is getting less than you deserve. And grace is receiving what you don't deserve. And it's interesting to see how justice, mercy, and grace are woven through the fabric of your story as God uses you to bring His restoration to others. So you're devouring the word, you're getting discipled, other groups are coming in, and then you go to a federal penitentiary, and where's that?
In Manchester, Kentucky. And that was where I first started doing my time.
When that door goes locked the first time, do you have any new thoughts that come to you of, I got like maybe 7 or 8 years of this, how or are you looking at it as a ministry opportunity? What's your frame of mind at that point?
I guess I've always been optimistic, and I've always tried to, make the best of my situation, my surroundings.
I know that about you.
And so I guess I looked at every opportunity as, this is a chance for me to continue to grow personally. I guess my grandmother helped instill that into me, where she told me pretty early on is each and every day you've got to try to figure out how you can better yourself or try to better somebody else. And, each and every day, it really is something that's stuck with me. We have a chance each and every day to better ourselves or to try to better somebody else. And so you have to take advantage of each and every day, because once we lose that day, it's gone forever.
Ever.
And time is the only thing that we can't ever get back. And so I really took that to heart, where each and every day, whether it was physical exercise, spiritual exercise, or ministry, just going and just, not always just preaching to somebody, but I'd say 90% of the ministry that I was involved with inside the prison was just building relationships and just sharing my testimony and talking to guys about how God had delivered me from, whether it was my temper, whether it was my language, whether it was just my way of thinking, my perspective on life, on authority figures, on parents, just all these different things that God had done in my life and had transformed. I was able to kind of share with not only other prisoners, but guards, my own family members that weren't saved yet. I really took that to heart, where each and every day I either tried to better myself or tried to better someone else's life.
So how'd you start your first small group of Bible study?
I think my first few Bible studies were actually already existing.
And you came in to attend ones that aren't existing?
Each prison does a pretty good job of, they have a chapel. They already have groups coming in from the outside. Usually they'll rotate who does the Sunday services. And then there'll be pretty regular groups that come in during the week. And then there'll be, each dormitory, there'll be a group of Christian men that will do a Bible study once or twice a week. Once I was already saved, so I had already started surrounding myself with other like-minded Christians. And once you get there, then you get plugged in pretty quickly, because the other older Christians that are on the compound that have been there for a while, really will kind of help, almost be like big brothers, mentors to you, especially if it's your first time going to prison. They'll kind of teach you the ins and the outs of prison life, what to look out for, what not to do, how to carry yourself. So it was kind of an instant family.
I think about the vision you get when you're in your Navigator before you're arrested of what life will be like after all this. And I keep thinking, as you share another part of your story, that God's vision is followed by his provision, and that your life's a picture of that. Well, somehow you get into Christian hip-hop. And does that happen in Kentucky, or does that happen somewhere else?
No, it first started in Manchester, Kentucky. Actually, in my dormitory, I actually met a young gentleman who had been in, at that time, probably 6 or 7 years. And they called him the Rap and Preach, that he actually had been saved, was a powerful minister. And there was groups that would come in with 30 or 40 members of their church from the outside, and would come in and sit in our church services. And there might be a couple of hundred people between the inmates and the actual people from the outside. And they would actually ask him to preach. But he also was a hip-hop artist before he got saved, and actually was probably one of the best rappers I've ever heard. When I first met him, he probably had 100 songs all in his head that he had never written any songs down, and could just take off and just rap for days. And by
And
then,
they were unique? Each one was different?
each one was unique. And, when I met him, he had been in for 6 or 7 years, had probably been saved a good portion of that. So all of his actual raps were all gospel raps. They were all about Christ. They were all about his testimony. They were all about ministering to, the population that was there. And so he was kind of my first mentor because he was in my housing unit. He was athletic, was into sports, was big into working out. So him and I had an instant bond. He ended up being my roommate for a while. And, he knew my talents and my skills. I have a tendency of talking a lot and have I guess a gift, or some may say a curse if you listen to my wife. So I've always been good with words and, at rhyming, and him and I would sit there and...
Time out. I got a friend that I found that he's one of us. And we were emailing, and he's always looking for humor and things, so I decided to rhyme every line in my email. And I got one back that was the same way. He rhymed every line, and so we went back and forth a bunch of times. So you're one of us. You got the rhymes, like things start rhyming in your head.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly. We're a tight-knit group, I guess.
Yeah. So this guy who's a hip-hop artist figures that out about you, and he disciples you in the art of hip-hop?
Him and I would sit down at night and just start working, and he would always have a chorus. One of his jobs was he was an orderly in the unit, so he would work in the unit cleaning, and he always had his headphones on. So he would be listening to music all day long, and it never failed. Anytime I saw him, he would come running up and, hey, listen to this, and he would just start singing a chorus, or he would just start spitting a verse and just going on. And
he would sing as well as...
Oh, yeah, he could sing, he could rap, and he would have this idea in his head of how he wanted the song to go, and he would get on me. Okay, all right, I'll do the first verse, you do the second verse, and then I'll come back with the third verse. And he was so gifted and talented, he would literally have it done in 5 minutes. And then he'd be on me. Come on, man, you need to write tonight. You need to do something tonight. And would be on me. And so we started an actual group. And we really were blessed in the federal system. They always have different outlets in the recreational yard. It could be sports. It could be like hobby crafts. They did leather. They actually had a music room. They would have microphones, a mixer, actual electric guitar with a bass and a lead, and then drums. And actually, that's where I first told you that we actually had one of the best drummers ever. We actually had one of the former drummers from Kool and the Gang.
Amazing.
Yeah, and at that actual compound, we also had our lead guitarist actually had his own studio down in Tennessee. And these guys were the most gifted and talented artists that we could just come in and, we called him, his name was Darnell Thompson, Brother T, everyone calls each other brother in there, as far as all the Christian brothers. So Brother T, he was the rapping preacher, and Brother T would come in and get one of them and start, kind of singing the chorus. And, David Jack was he was our lead guitarist, and he would just sit and kind of listen to it, and he would start strumming on his guitar. And literally within a few minutes would be able to turn around and tell our bass guitarist the exact notes, everything to play, the actual string. And before, literally, I'd say 75% of our songs, if we came in with the verses and the chorus, within 10 minutes, these guys would have all the music and be able to, put it together. And then our drummer, as soon as he heard the tempo and kind of the rhythm of it, would just be able to listen. And within literally 30 seconds, he would have the beat. And then he would start adding little cymbals here and there. And, we had ready-made songs that could have been recorded within 10, 15 minutes. It was just amazing to watch how God would just, not only give us words that rhymed and messages in our head, but also to be able to give the gifts and talents to these artists, where as soon as they heard those words and heard kind of the tempo, would be able to just automatically put music with that. And put a bass line, with the drums. And there was times we had keyboards that they would be able to do different bass lines and be able to play. We had someone to play the keyboard. And we actually had, a number of songs. And we were actually able to perform for the church, for a lot of outside groups.
For the church service that took place at the...
Yeah, at the chapel, where we would have, weekly church services on Sunday, and then there'd be services during the week. And it got to a point where they would request us. Groups would come in from the outside, and they would ask if we would play a couple songs. And so we got pretty popular in there, and then we actually did a couple concerts for the actual whole compound. They would set up all the equipment on the rec yard, and of course it was other bands too, it was secular bands too, but everyone got to pick, I think it was 5 or 6 songs that you could actually play for the rec yard. And so I'm glad I don't have the pictures anymore of us performing, but I used to have some pictures. I'm sure they're floating around somewhere. But, it was a hit. I mean, we had guys, unsaved guys, some of the most ruthless criminals that you could ever imagine, coming up to us afterwards, just talking about how, our music and our lyrics really touched them. Now, the lyrics are about God, right? Yeah, all Christian lyrics? Yes, all Christ-centered. And what are you doing? Are you playing an instrument? Are you hip-hopping yourself? Like, what are you... No, I'm actually rapping. Really? Yeah. Can you think of anything right now? Does any lyric come to mind? Any 16 bars? My mind be going deep into territories of victims to get them and get with them, consolidate them, forbid them. Just, just getting deep into the... Come on now. Just getting deep into the mind of even our victims and what our victims went through and our own testimonies and what we went through and our childhoods. And a lot of our songs were more for ministry purposes, for reaching out to the lost compound that we were, thrust into, I mean. In a way, the details of who Christ is and what he can do for your life, right? Correct. Yeah. Yeah. In ways that they can understand. It kind of reminds me of what I do a lot nowadays in the workplace, of just sharing my testimony and then following it up with something to do with Christ, or leaving them on a note of hope where, I could talk about the things that God has brought me through, or some of the things that I've dealt with my past, and then I'll follow up with how God delivered me from that and how God had given me strength to be able to overcome certain issues and certain addictions. And that's a lot of our raps were us telling our past, telling our stories, and then coming full circle back to how God delivered us from that, how God had forgiven us from that, or of those sins. So you captured the attention of your audience in a way that they could understand the gospel, and they responded. Oh, I mean, we had, we were able to give altar calls after. In the prison, at the service. Yeah, at the services. We even had 60 to 70-year-old Christians from the hills of Kentucky that would come in these groups, and they would come up and tell us after they heard us a couple times, and they would be really just blunt and honest and say, you know what, first time I heard you guys start rapping, I automatically just shut you guys out and just said, oh, here we go. They started, rap is of the devil, and, as soon as you started that music, I just thought this is straight from the devil, and I didn't want to hear it. But you guys changed our way of thinking to where now we understand there's no genre of music of the devil. There's lyrics from the devil. And, and we really started listening to your actual lyrics and what you guys were saying. And your guys' message was so powerful that it actually ministered to me. Here we had these people by the end, bobbing their head or, raising their hands or, clapping along to the beat. People that you would never, ever catch listening to hip-hop, to the contrary, would have walked out if it was any other setting, if they could have walked out, if they didn't have guards standing there and they're locked in there until a certain time. Mm-hmm. But, so we were able to not only minister to those lost souls on the compound and those guys who were wavering in the church and may have been invited by some of the other Christian brothers on the compound, but we were able to have some really uplifting and praise and kind of worship songs as well. Do you think there'll ever be a reunion tour? When you're in there, you're always dreaming about when we get out, this is what we're going to do first, and, this is how we can do an album, and we can go on tour, and, get connections over here, connections over there. And so we've talked, and made plans. I'd like to say yes, not so much for myself. I enjoyed it, but for the guys that I was involved with, because I've met some really gifted and talented guys that I hope by the time they come home, that I'll be in a position to be able to help them out and be able to maybe launch their careers. Because these guys were just, I mean, phenomenal at rapping, at singing. You know, like I told you, Brother Thompson, I mean, was a powerful minister. And so, there'll definitely be a reunion one day. Whether I go on tour or not, that may be another story. But definitely, I hope that I'm in a position that I can maybe provide a platform for these guys to be able to go and use their gifts and talents.
That would be cool.
Oh, definitely.
Literally.
And then you may be able to hear one of my full songs.
I would love to. So you moved around to other facilities, and I assume you didn't hip-hop at all those? That was for that place and time with that group of guys?
Well, actually, in Manchester, we probably had the most songs. I mean, we probably had 30 songs. I mean, we probably had enough for probably 3 albums. Then I went, you know, in the federal system, you always start out at a higher level. And then as you do the programs that they ask you to do, you stay out of trouble, you work your way down through the lower security. So I had went to another facility that was a low security, a little bit smaller compound. And, you know, there I think they already had a group there. They had a choir. And I think I jumped in on a couple of groups and maybe did a handful of songs. And then once I went to Minnesota, to the medical facility to have my knee surgery, I was there probably a year and a half, and I got pretty heavy into the music again. I met another gentleman that it was just, this guy had a voice. He was more of a singer, but could play the piano, and then he could also rap. And, you know, we really, you know, we did quite a few songs there. I started singing in the choir, which please don't ask me to sing. I sound really good with other voices around me. But, you know, I got involved with the church there and was involved with, you know, we had a full usher board. We had elders. I mean, it was a pretty established church within the prison.
Incredible.
Yeah, and so we had some pretty good songs that the groups from the outside loved, and there was an actual gospel hip-hop artist, Cross, that really loved a few of our songs. And so really Rochester and then when I was at Manchester were the main locations that we did a lot of music. But there towards the end, when I was in Ohio, you know, right before I had come home, I was more into fitness and really just trying to, you know, finish the last bit of time and really get prepared to come home, trying to finish my college courses, my biblical studies, and really.
You were working on those in prison? Correct. And also spending time in the library to learn a little bit about legal things, too, to help your case?
Yeah, and throughout the federal system, you have to have a job. You know, either you're in school getting your GED, trying to get an actual college degree, or you have to work. And so I've had several different jobs, but one of them was in the library, and actually I worked in the law library section of the library. And so guys basically had studied and become paralegals in there and would help other inmates out with their legal work for different petitions or appeals. So yeah, I spent quite a few hours in the law library.
You were spared from a riot one day when you were in there?
Yeah, actually, that job actually saved me from, I was on a compound that was at the Medium High in Manchester, Kentucky, where we had, it was over 2,000 inmates, and we had a lot of D.C. inmates, Washington, D.C. inmates. We're a big population, and we actually had a couple gangs, mainly out of Chicago, that didn't see eye to eye and ended up being pretty much a full-scale riot. And we were on lockdown, I think, for a week after that. Quite a few guys got stabbed. Ended up being a big fight. Maybe a couple guards got hurt. But I actually happened to be working. So, you know, the rec yard is connected. The buildings are connected, but you can only enter through the actual doors on the outside. So immediately, anytime something like that happens, everything gets locked down. So, you know, from my view out the windows, I could see guards running, inmates running, being there, I was locked away immediately and spared from any injury. So I didn't get caught in the middle or anything like that. So,
well, it's been amazing how God's had His hand on you. how he chased you down, draw you to himself, gave you a picture of what that would look like, and the right time you surrendered to him. And he's used you wherever you are to draw others to himself, and now he's doing that through the game of volleyball and the fitness training and everything else that you do. It's just been a blessing to be your friend and to have you here with us again. I just want to thank you so much for sharing your story, being so transparent and so vulnerable with us. I know God will use this to reach people where they are.
I thank you for your time and your wonderful crew. They've done a phenomenal job of putting all of this together, and I just thank you for giving me the opportunity to be able to share my testimony.
Thank you, man. Love you. See you at the next volleyball match.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, when I hear Will's story, I think about the phrase, bloom where you're planted. A friend of mine who's a pastor today was doing a job as a janitor. I have the same exact job, so we're sharing each other our janitor stories. And he told me about how he wasn't giving it all he had, and he wasn't doing it with all his heart. And in fact, he was frustrated that he was even in that system, that he was even doing that job. And as a janitor, feeling that way as a young kid, a guy comes up to him and he says, you know what? You just got to bloom where you're planted. And it reminded me of my own life. I was always looking ahead to what was next in my life. And I realized I was robbing myself of the present, which is a gift. And so I was in the auction business thinking about what was next and the next deal and maybe the next kind of business and the next thing I would do with my company. And I realized I was never really blooming where I was planted. And when that switch flipped for me and that switch flipped for my friend, our lives began to change because we were able to give fully to whatever God had for us at that moment in time. And we began to fully experience the blessings that He had intended for us, and we would grow in wisdom. Well, I want to ask you today, how about you? Are you blooming where you're planted? Right where you are today, would you allow God to use you to bring His restoration to others? As Will's grandmother said, would you take every day and recognize it as a gift and live in the present and better yourself or better someone else? Our prayer for you today is that you would bloom where you're planted, that you would experience Christ right where you are, and you would be used by Him, surrender to Him, to bring His restoration to others.